So hey guys, how are you all? Welcome to. So we are back with a brand new movie on what if Naruto disguised in Koneko peerage with Sword of Heritage in DxD World movie, but before we start, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Now let's begin the story. Growing up, Hyodo Issei was an odd child. He was something of a prodigy, both in mind and body. And he was something of a super pervert. Issei's first word had been, opai. Though Issei's father later admitted that his first word had also been opai, his second word, oddly enough, was gamma. Issei's My Hobbies assignment in kindergarten had resulted in the 400-page manuscript of what would later be the first book of the top-selling, award-winning series that was the Icha Icha. His father had been so proud. His mother less so. He later bought a pet toad, the first of many, called Gamabunta, with the first paycheck from the series. Issei's My Dream assignment in grade 1 of primary school had been a proposal to the Japanese government of why monogamy laws should be revoked so that he could achieve his dream of attaining a harem. The proposal was narrowly defeated in the Legislative Assembly. In second grade, Issei had started his researching, glorified peeking habit to, in Issei's own words, truly cement the realism within his Icha Icha series. Nobody was quite sure how the perverted, brown-haired boy could possibly survive the near-daily beatings he would receive from the victims of his research. But alas, logic didn't really apply to the great Hyodo Issei, or so the legend goes. Issei's parents, mainly his mother because Issei's father couldn't be more proud of his son, had been somewhat concerned about his somewhat unseemly habits, and had thus brought him to the doctor in the third grade. The doctor had determined that despite Issei's eccentricities, the boy had an unorthodox intelligence showing tremendous memory and quick thinking. Further, the brown-haired pervert was surprisingly perceptive, being able to see details others would miss and showing a great aptitude to form accurate logical conclusion from seemingly insignificant pieces of evidence or fact. Like a police officer. Or a spy. All in all, the doctor had concluded that the Issei was a perfectly healthy boy. After, of course, said doctor slapped the self-proclaimed super pervert for his wandering hands had found, and groped, her ass. And so when it was announced that Kuo Academy, the haven of Opai, had changed to be co-ed, he quickly sought to transfer there for high school. The fees weren't really a problem with the vast financial backing Issei had in the form of the super lucrative Icha Icha series. It was there, at Kuo Academy, where Issei finally met his brethren, people who shared his love for Opai, who appreciated women as much as he did. Matsuda, nicknamed Perverted Baldy, a self-proclaimed lolicon and a member of the photo club. A truly glorious compatriot who provided Issei with stacks of photographic masterpieces, which served greatly as research material. Motohama, nicknamed Perverted Glasses, a man who was born with the envious ability to instantly calculate a woman's 3 sizes. The information also proved to be invaluable to his research repertoire. Issei could honestly say that he enjoyed his life up to this point. He had also quite enjoyed being part of the perverted trio, despite girls fleeing at the sight of him. That or beating the daylights out of him. Despite all this, Issei still felt like his life was missing something. In one of his musings, Issei, because despite his many eccentricities Issei was somewhat more philosophical and introspective than people expected, wondered whether he would truly find a girl, even just one girl, because in truth, even just one girl was plenty that would love him for him, perversion and all. Whilst Issei truly wished with all his might that he would one day amass a harem, he knew that this dream was something of a temporary, childish one, a dream that was near unattainable and one which would likely be forgotten about and replaced by another one as he matured and became more exposed to the realities of the world. From stories that his father told him, that was pretty much how the older Hyodo's life panned out, and he seemed pretty content about it all. Issei didn't like to admit it, but he had a small fear that one day, a long way down in the future, he would end up alone, a white-haired hermit who traveled around the lands, writing erotica, never truly settling down. That one day he would fall in love with a girl but watch from the sidelines as for some reason he kept imagining a big-breasted woman, a purple diamond-like tattoo adorning her forehead, blonde hair tied back in twin pigtails, fell in love with another. That one day he would look back on his life with regret. That even in death he wouldn't be able to achieve anything of worth, whether that be saving someone precious to him, be that a friend, teacher or student, or achieving true world peace, because that was his dream, right after building a harem. Because despite all his perversion, all his self-confidence, Hyodo Issei was still a living, breathing human being with fears and regrets. It was therefore to Issei's pleasant surprise that he was asked out by an honestly beautiful girl, seemingly at random during his second year of attendance at Kuo Academy. Yuma, the girl in question, was a true beauty, though Kuo town seemed to be full of them. Long black hair cascaded down her back and perfectly framed her face. Kind violent eyes, which shined with innocence, looked at him hopefully when he was asked to be her boyfriend. How could a hot-blooded man like Hyodo Issei reject an offer like that, especially after that depressing self-assessment? When Yuma had shown up for their date in a short black dress which accentuated her long legs and a tight, light purple blouse that highlighted her sensual bosom, Issei found himself thanking the heavens. He acted the part of a gentleman through the whole date and managed to not make a huge ass out of himself during the day. He could honestly say he had a great time. They had done things typical of a romantic couple, going to an apparel store where Issei had bought the beautiful raven-haired girl a scrunchy bracelet, a romantic meal at an ice cream parlor where he had gotten a soft drink and Yuma an ice cream sundae. Issei could truly say that he really liked Yuma, especially after that date. Maybe even the beginning of a feeling even deeper, more complex, than, like, love, was starting to settle in his chest. Say, Issei-kun. After the date the new couple had made their way to a nearby park. The sun was setting, giving the sky an orange tint. Light reflected off the fountain behind Yumaheim, giving her a heavenly aura, for surely this beauty in front of him was sent from heaven. The pickup line, "Did it hurt when you fell from heaven?" which Issei swears he invented, truly applied here. Yes, Yumaheim? Issei asked, a nervous smile working its way onto his face. His heart quickened even more as Yuma gave him a sweet smile. "There's something I was hoping you would do for me. Think of it as a commemoration of our first date." Yuma looked up at him through her fringe. Blushing demurely, with a finger pressed to those perfectly kissable lips, she looked more beautiful than ever. Issei's heart quickened even more. Seriously, if this continued he would surely get a heart attack sooner rather than later, as blood roared in his ears. Was this truly happening? Could he finally put his doubts behind him? Was there really a girl out there who will like him? Would he, after 17 years of highs and lows that had been his life, be finally receiving his first kiss? He sure hoped so. What is it? Could you please die for me? Issei really hoped he had heard her wrong, however his muscles tensed in anticipation of an attack. Suddenly the delicate beauty turned sinister and Issei felt a sinking feeling in his chest. The previous light which had highlighted her angelic beauty now left shadows which cut harsh angles upon her previously innocent face. Her once pure eyes turned dark and malicious. Instinctively his arm reached for his belt where a kunai hung, because when he had passed a weapon supply store during middle school he had automatically been attracted to their selection of ninja tools and had promptly bought what the store advertised as the ultimate ninja tool bag. "Could you please die for me?" Suddenly dark feathered wings sprouted from Yuma's back, tearing the fabric of her blouse leaving 2 gaping holes. The wings gave her an even sinister look as she resembled some sort of demonic harpy. With a flap of her wings, Yuma shot high into the air and hung there. Meanwhile Issei, sensing the danger, had jumped back holding his kunai in a defensive reserve grip. His eyes were roaming the area hoping that he could come up with some sort of plan to escape whatever was happening. Suddenly Yuma's clothes changed before his eyes, the previously cute clothing being replaced by a risque latex bikini which wouldn't have looked out of place on a dominatrix in a BDSM video. Her previously petite frame grew, her height growing until she was well over 6 foot, her breasts enlarged until they were truly spectacular. If Issei were in any other situation he would have brought out the little book from his back pocket and began writing whilst giggling perversely. Although it proved to be short-lived, playing Love Dive with you was quite fun, Yuma said as she held her right hand above her head. Light seemed to gather and condense, in a way that Issei knew light didn't behave, creating a spear-like weapon. "Dating a kid like you was a nice break for me." She held up her left hand, which was she still wore the small scrunchie he had bought her. "Don't worry. I'll always treasure this gift you gave me." She lifted the spear, obviously intending on throwing it. "That is why I will make this as painless as possible." Before she could throw the light spear however, Issei had brought out smoke pellets from his ninja pack, throwing them down. In the small window where her vision was impaired Issei quickly made his way behind a tree for cover. Fuck, of course this was all too good to be true. Issei quickly scrimmaged through his ninja bag as he sought to initiate his escape plan. Finally he found a kunai. God damn it, doesn't she know that there is a no bodily harm until at least after the 3rd date rule? Thankfully, Issei had adhered to a strict training regime throughout his life as a result of a constant nagging in his mind whenever he hadn't exercised in a while. As a result of this physical training, when the super pervert threw the kunai, it sailed at an unexpectedly high speed, grazing a visibly surprised Yuma. It also helped that Yuma was still somewhat disoriented from the smoke. You little shit. I was going to make this quick but now I'll wring your little neck." Yuma screamed as she swooped down quickly to pierce Issei with her spear. She, however, did not see the ninja wire that was attached to the kunai nor the other projectile the ninja wire was attached to. As a result, when she plowed into the near-invisible string, the two projectiles coming back into the outstretched hands of Issei, who quickly slammed them into the trunk of the tree he was hiding behind. The string tightened around the raven-haired girl, resulting in Yuma being tied rather ineloquently against said tree. This should be enough. That ninja wire can withstand 200 pounds of force, she can't possibly break through it. Issei quickly turned, hoping to make a dash to the exit of the park. What he didn't expect was his legs not moving. Looking down, he saw that the lighting spear which had previously been held by Yuma was cleaved in his stomach. Collapsing to his knees, Issei turned his head slightly and saw that Yuma had broken out of her bindings. "I would have cut you down right now, but I guess I'll just let you bleed out after you scratched me," Yuma said as she harshly took out the spear protruding through Issei's body. Issei immediately collapsed as more blood spilled out onto the pavement before him. "So, this is it, huh? The twist ending of the tale of Hyodo Issei the Gallant." As Issei bled out, slowly dying from his wounds, his mind beginning to go black, a small slip of paper that he had forgotten about began glowing, a deep crimson as it flew out of Issei's back pocket. I don't want to die like this. I don't want to die alone. I still have so much to achieve." There was a flash of light as the sheet disappeared, being replaced by a large blood-red circle. The circle hovered for a few moments before slowly descending towards the ground, akin to the holographic communicators in sci-fi movies. As the crimson circle finished its descent, a figure appeared from within. Rias Gremory looked at the boy who she had been observing for the past couple of weeks. It seemed her assumptions were correct. He did possess a sacred gear, a powerful weapon bestowed to man by the biblical god. It was for that reason and that reason alone, Rias Gremory hadn't intervened. She had also been somewhat surprised by the boy's combat ability. Truthfully, Rias truly hated acquiring Hyodo Issei in this manner, and if circumstances were different she would have approached his recruitment in a very different manner. But, as of this moment, Rias needed power, and she was becoming desperate. She couldn't risk the chance, no matter how minuscule, of Issei, a wielder of a sacred gear, to reject joining her peerage. Her thoughts were interrupted by a cough and the soft sound of splattering blood. Looking down, Rias was surprised to see that Issei was not only alive, but he was still conscious. He coughed, causing more blood to spurt out. It was a miracle he could speak. The spear should have more or less disemboweled him. Seems I can L leave the W world W with one L less R regret, W with such a B beautiful girl B by M my side. Rias found herself feeling surprisingly flushed. Whilst she had been told many times that she was beautiful, it was usually only said before someone asked her for a favor or after a long, perverse look at her body. That, or it was said by her family members, but that didn't really count. It was almost like the boy before her was stating a fact, that her beauty was an objective truth and not a subjective opinion. And the boy was obviously only looking at her face. The fact that the boy had said this whilst dying had made it more heartfelt, more genuine. Who knew that the resident school pervert could be so sincere when complimenting a girl? It also made her feel more regretful over her lack of action. Summoning her evil pieces, Rias got to work, placing the pieces of his chest. She wasn't too surprised that the boy before her was worth 8 pawns, not after the fight he had put up. "I command thee, Hyodo Issei, on my name Rias Gremory." As Rias held her hands over the chess pieces, the red glow they possessed seemed to brighten even more. "Become my servant and walk these lands as a devil." Slowly, but surely, the glowing chess pieces sunk into Issei's body. "Thou shalt lead a new life with great joy as a member of my peerage." As the mutated pieces disappeared into Issei's body, the world was once again shrouded in darkness. Issei gasped for air, his life being drawn back into him. Rias watched as the brown-haired boy went from the brink of death to relatively well, save for the wound remaining in his stomach. It would seem she would have to heal that manually, which was somewhat odd as the evil pieces should have healed everything. Shrugging to herself, Rias picked up the school's resident pervert as a teleportation circle appeared before them. "Hyodo Issei, it would seem that you are even more interesting than I expected." A cute, though flat-chested blonde girl approached the clearing as I sat there waiting alongside a black-haired, white-skinned boy. A middle-aged man stood off to the side, eyes closed. As the girl approached, I stood up, offering a hand and a goofy smile. "Yo, I'm Jiraiya. You can send me a love letter later." "I'm sorry, Jiraiya," the same beautiful blonde I saw before said to me. Now she was older, more mature, probably in her 20s. The previously flat chest had been replaced by the greatest bosom I'd ever and probably will ever see. I recognized her. She was the girl I had imagined falling in love with whenever the more philosophical part of my mind comes to the surface and my perversion took a backseat. Tsunade. That was her name, and I knew. This woman was the woman I loved. I'm sorry, Jiraiya, I can't return your feelings, because I love Dan. But she didn't love me. I was in a cave of some sort, a giant maroon toad sitting before me. Around his neck bore a beaded necklace with the Japanese word for oil engraved onto the largest bead at the center of his chest. A ridiculous-looking hat completed the old toad's attire. A smaller male-looking toad, Fukosuka-sensei, on my left addressed me. Jiraiya-chan, the great sage has had a vision concerning you. As you know, this is a prediction about your future. Listen well. Yes, sir, I answered, waiting for the prophecy to be spoken by the revered toad elder. Now then, in my dreams I see you becoming a pervert with no equal, and a shinobi of incredible talent. And someday you will take a pupil. I was slightly annoyed there. I knew I was a pervert, but did he have to be so specific? This pupil will become the harbinger of a great revolution in the shinobi world. I have seen this in my dreams. Well, that wasn't very specific. Why is it that important parts of prophecies were always so vague? A revolution, I asked, hoping to seek clarification. They will finally bring peace to the world or utterly destroy it. The result of their revolution will be one or the other. One or the other? What do you mean? I needed to know more. You will be their master, their teacher. And eventually you will be faced with a difficult choice. The path you take will determine the fate of the world. Me, what do I have to do? What's the right choice? This was too sudden, too big. I was trying to process this. What was the choice? How could I achieve peace? You will travel the world and write a book. The great elder seemingly randomly changed the topic. I don't understand the reasons myself. But you will walk across the globe observing, all creation watching as nature takes its course. Looked like the fate of the world was in my hands. Never had I feel more weighted by responsibility. Stepping out from the wooden shack that my students and I called home, I saw a red-haired boy Nagato sitting quietly on the raised step out front. Sighing, I looked back through the open door to see that the orange-haired boy Yahiko and the blue-haired girl Konan were still asleep before joining Nagato on the step. We sat there for a few minutes, him looking down whilst I stared at the perpetual rain which covered AIM. I don't know if it was right or wrong myself, but thanks to you, Yahiko is alive. You saved him. You did what was right. No one blames you. Nagato looked up at me with surprised eyes. I looked at him for a few moments before continuing. When people get hurt, they learn to hate. When people hurt others, they in turn become hated and racked with guilt. But knowing that pain allows people to be kind. Pain allows people to grow. Nagato looked away as I finished. I just want to protect them, no matter how much pain it causes. I smiled sadly at him. I understand. Shisho, what are you always thinking about? The first thing I wanted to say was Oppai, but I knew this was a serious question and he deserved a serious answer. This world, it's filled with war. Hatred is everywhere. I think about how I can change that. I wonder what peace is. I want to know what peace is. I want to know the answer. A thoughtful silence grew over us. I hoped that Nagato understood what I was talking about. We sat there in the rain as time passed. I stood opposite my white-skinned, black-haired friend, both of our bodies bruised from the battle that had just occurred. Yellow, snake-like eyes bore into me as I looked at his face, hoping to find some sign of regret. Why, Orochi? How could you betray Konoha? How could you kill all those people? A malicious smile grew on his face as his eyes became more demented. Jiraiya, always so loyal. Always so slow. Why wouldn't I betray Konoha? Why would I stay in a place which robs me of my talent, that steals from me the credit I am due? Why is it that your pathetic student is named Hokage whilst I am forced to wallow in some pit? I couldn't believe it. My friend, the man who I had always relied on, was willing to betray everything for such a petty reason. Is this what this is all about? You being passed over for Hokage? All of this because you are jealous? Partially, Orochimaru shrugged. Also because I see now that I can achieve so much more, be so much more, without the confines of morality that has locked Konoha in the Dark Ages. But it's been nice talking to you, Jiraiya. It's nice to see that you never learn from your mistakes. Suddenly, Orochimaru's body seemed to disappear in some sort of haze. Genjutsu, I muttered to myself as I sunk to my knees. Never had I felt so useless. I was looking down at an older, grown-up Minato as he smiled at me, book in hand. No, I don't think so. This tale is wonderful. As I walked to the chair opposite, Minato continued to talk. Each chapter reads like one of your legendary exploits. I thought his determination, his guts to never give up, was admirable. He smiled up at me as I sat down. He's a lot like you, sensei. Embarrassed, I started rubbing my head. Why, you think so? So I was thinking, I was really hoping my unborn son can become a great ninja just like this main character. Placing the book down, Minato continued. Which is why I'd like your permission to name my son after him. Hearing the request, I felt my eyes widening in shock. Are you sure? It's just a random name that I thought up while eating ramen. A melodic voice floated in from behind Minato, from the kitchen. Naruto. A beautiful red-haired woman walked into the room, her arm around her obviously pregnant stomach. Standing in the doorway, she gave me a gentle smile. It's a wonderful name. Kushina, I said, trying to hide my feelings of happiness and pride that were welling up inside me. I gulped down slightly. It wouldn't be very manly of the great Jiraiya-sama if he were to break down from tears of joy, would it? See, cripes. That would make me the godfather, I guess. Hey, are you sure you want that? Kushina moved forward, resting her arm of her husband's shoulder. Minato smiled up at his wife with all the love in the world before interrupting my rambling. You are my sensei. A truly great man who possesses the true talent of a ninja. There's no other like you. I had never felt so damn honored in my life. Oppai, oppai. I was scribbling down on my notepad. I always knew that the onsen was the greatest place for research. Suddenly I heard a splashing sound from behind me. Turning my head slightly, I saw a man in his late 20s with sunglasses talking to a blonde-haired gaki who was wearing blinding orange clothing. Huh, looks like I'm right on time. Suddenly a yell and the older man Ebisu, I reminded myself. The tutor for little Konohamaru and one of my biggest fans, jumped at me. Smirking, I summoned Gamma, tripping the guy over, resulting in Ebisu being temporarily knocked out. The blonde gaki ran up to Ebisu, checking his pulse. After a moment, he pointed an accusing finger at me. What's that huge frog? Who the hell are you? Now wasn't that the perfect question? I smirked, adopting the perfect kabuki pose. Thanks for asking, I am Mount Myoboku's holy Gamma Sennin, the great Jiraiya-sama of the legendary three. The blonde looked at me with a dumbfounded expression. Dispelling Gamma, I walked up to the kid. Ho, ho, and who are you who disturbs the great Jiraiya-sama from doing his research? Oh, you old perv, and I'm Uzumaki Naruto, the future Hokage of Konoha. Hey, looked like Minato's son had grown up well, damn well. Don't worry, Minato, Kushina. I'll make Naruto's dream come true. I'll make him into the best man to ever grace Konoha, to ever grace the shinobi world. I was standing on a giant brown snake opposite Orochimaru. The only real difference in appearance of my former friend was that his arms were by his sides, bandaged. I was on my knees panting, my chakra moving oddly. It was impossible for me to utilize my true strength. Damn Tsunade. Off to the side, a silver-haired kid with glasses seemed to be approaching Tsunade. Further away from them was a black-haired woman and Naruto, both lying down injured. Haha. To think you, who was once called the village madness, would ferry around such a kid and struggle tirelessly for the village. You've fallen, haven't you? Looking down at me, Orochimaru continued. I have a keen eye for ability, and that kid, he stopped here, nodding his head in Naruto's direction, is mediocrity in my eyes. Smirking slightly, I replied, it's precisely for this reason that I don't need the Uchiha kid. It's no fun raising a genius who is good from the start. Orochimaru, with that look that he used to always give me when he knew something I didn't. I have never hated that look more in my life. So you can't leave him alone, huh? Because it's like looking at your old self? That kid you have can't beat Uchiha with the Sharingan. A shinobi's worth is determined by how many jutsu one can learn. One who can learn all the jutsu in the world will therefore be the ultimate ninja. After all, a ninja is merely one who can use ninjutsu. I looked up at him with pity in my eyes. You still don't understand it, do you? A ninja is one who endures. A shinobi's most important skill isn't the number of jutsu he can use, but rather the mettle to never give up. Orochimaru shrugged slightly. I guess it's a difference of opinion. Staring at each other, we both tensed our legs, preparing to strike. Both breathing harshly, we pounced. I was sitting on a step of a Shinto shrine, my blonde-haired student, godson, sitting on grass facing me. He had just asked me a complicated question. A question that before him, Nagato and Minato had asked me. Naruto, even I can see that there's too much hate in this shinobi world. There's too much hate? Naruto asked, pressing me for more. I've always wanted to do something about all this hate, but I don't really know where to start. But one day I truly believe that one day a time will come where all people can live today in understanding. In harmony. I said whilst scratching the back of my head. Boy, it sounds fairly complicated to me, Naruto said, grinning. I smiled, leaning forward so that I was staring right in the little blonde's eyes. And if I can't find a solution to this problem, then maybe I'll entrust the task to you, Naruto? Naruto's grin widened as he saluted. Yes sir, I can't turn down a request from my Shisho, now can I Ero Sennin? And for the first time I thought that maybe, just maybe, the child of prophecy wasn't Nagato or Minato after all. Maybe it was the little Gaki in orange right before me. The tale of Jiraiya the Gallant. Now it'll end a bit better, I hope. The final chapter. I'll call it. Frog at the bottom of the well drifts off into the great ocean. Just barely glorious. But glorious indeed. Now I suppose it's about time I put down my pen. Oh, right. What should I name the sequel? I wonder. Let's see. The Tale of Uzumaki Naruto. Yes. That has a nice ring to it. As my body sunk, being consumed by the vast abyss of the ocean, for the first time I could truly say that maybe just maybe that everything I had gone through, that all the shortcomings and failure and regrets in my life, had truly amounted to something. Because at that moment I knew, with as much certainty that I could say the sky was blue or that my love for Oppai would always live on, that the shinobi world was nearing a seismic shift, where peace would replace war as a constant, where people, where they be shinobi or citizens, could learn to live in harmony with each other. For I had faith that Uzumaki Naruto would succeed where I, Jiraiya of the Sannin, failed. For even if Uzumaki Naruto, the one that I now knew to be the true child of prophecy, was to become a limbless invalid, he would still inspire the people around him to change for the better. For even if a person were to slight Uzumaki Naruto in the worst possible way, the blonde would merely turn the other cheek, would only see the potential for redemption and not his own thirst for vengeance. I had faith that Uzumaki Naruto would never give up, never fall before his dream, their dream of true peace, was achieved. Because that was Uzumaki Naruto's Nindo, one that was shared by his Shisho. I was truly proud of my student. As I sensed my life nearing its final moments, I smiled to myself. I still had my regrets, things I wanted to do before I died, but for the first time I could truly say I may have succeeded in something. It was a beautiful morning. The sky was clear, the sun shone, brighter than it usually did, and a gentle cooling breeze blew through the streets of Kuo town. The sound of birds chirping quietly made it the perfect, tranquil morning. That was for everyone but our resident protagonist. Startled, Issei fell out of bed well before his beloved alarm clock could yell at him in that cute tsundere voice of its. Hobbling slowly towards a mirror, Issei looked at his reflection. What is happening? The face staring back at him was undoubtedly that of Hyodo Issei, one of the perverted trio. Breathing slowly, Issei tried to get a grip on himself. Because he knew that whilst it was impossible, what he had seen last night in those dream memories were true. For whilst he was Hyodo Issei, he knew that, at the same time, he was Jiraiya of the Sannin. Issei was sure that this wasn't meant to happen, wasn't reincarnation, because that was obviously what had happened, meant to be something of a factory reset. I need to calm down. Breathing harshly, he stumbled backwards onto his bed, his head in his hands. Tsunade, Naruto, Pain, Nagato. What had happened to them after he left? Was the code he left enough? Did Pa make it out? Did Nagato redeem himself in the end? Did Naruto finally achieve his dream and become Hokage? Was the shinobi world at peace? Taking deep breaths, Issei processed everything going on in his head right now. I don't think if it will work, but I can try. Promptly sitting with his legs crossed, Issei's hands came together to form a half-ram seal. I need to unlock my chakra first, find myself some familiar ground. Breathe in. Breathe out. 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 Slowly Issei entered a meditative state. He was now in his own world, the outside realm, a distant memory. Issei was searching within himself to find that tether, that string which would allow his physical and spiritual energies to come together properly. After 10 minutes of meditating he found it, and he pulled. What seemed to be blue light started to engulf his body. Grunting slightly, Issei opened his eyes. It's not as bad as I thought. Good thing my habits kicked in and I trained my body even before all this crazy happened. I'm sure I can get near my old strength fairly quickly. Uncrossing his legs, Issei assumed a crouching position before biting his thumb. Going through the appropriate seals, he thrust his hand on the floor. Kachiyose no Jutsu, summoning technique. To Issei's bitter disappointment, but also to his expectation, there was no smoke, no toad suddenly appearing, no grumbling about clumsiness, complaints about owed debts. He still owed Bunta a lot of money, or old married couples arguing. Sighing, Issei stood up before sitting back down again on the edge of his bed. With no further information about his current predicament, Issei couldn't really do, well, anything. The toads were obviously out and he had no idea where he was or how to get anywhere from here, let alone somewhere specific like Konoha. And even if he did find a way back, Issei wasn't completely sure he was needed. After all, the elemental nations still had Uzumaki Naruto, didn't it? And Issei had decided to place his faith in the blonde-haired knucklehead future Hokage. Issei wouldn't stop believing in his disciple even after dying and being reborn. Leaning back so he could look at the ceiling in thought, Issei adjusted his arms, placing them behind him on the hard bed for support. At least what should have been a hard bed. Instead, Issei felt a warm, soft fleshy mound in his hand. Drawing on the life experience he had when he was Jiraiya, Issei knew instinctively what was in his hand. The bare breast of a woman. Issei's base instincts took the front seat of his mind, easily pushing his other thoughts aside. Feels like a DD cup. He turned around, a bit of drool coming out of his mouth as he looked at the woman who possessed such an exquisite bosom. It seemed that when Issei had fallen off his bed, his sheets had also joined him on the floor, and thus he had the most excellent, unobstructed view of whoever was in his bed. Shifting his eyes upwards reluctantly, he gave the girl a closer look. It was a very beautiful girl, a very beautiful, exotic girl. As he looked at the girl, he took note of several things. For one, she possessed creamy pale, perfect skin. Crimson hair spread out over his bed, making the girl seem more exotic than ever. Truly, this very naked girl in his bed put even Yuma's beauty to shame. It was only after a second of staring at her in wonder and disbelief that Issei realized he knew this girl. Rias Gremory, who, along with Himejima Akeno, was one of the two great Oni-samas of the school. Gulping, Issei continued to look at the girl, drinking in her beauty. Moving his eyes downwards, Issei stared down at the mound of hair that was above her delicate flower. It seemed like she was a natural redhead. Looks like those rumors weren't true after all. Well, this was surely a morning full of surprises. Firstly, it turns out he was Issei and Jiraiya, and that he had slept, in the literal sense, with Rias Gremory last night. His experience as Jiraiya told him that no further activities had taken place, to his bitter disappointment. There's only one way to react to a morning like this. Issei quickly reached for his valuable research notes, which sat on his bedside table, with his non-groping hand before opening it and writing. Rias' ears twitched as the distinctive sound of pen on paper was heard. Opening her eyes slowly, she found herself looking at the face of the one and only Hyodo Issei. The boy didn't seem to realize she was awake, as he was too busy frantically scribbling into a notepad. "Good morning," Rias greeted the boy. Issei seemed to freeze. His eyes turned to meet hers as he smiled at her nervously. Good morning." Rias smiled, amused at the boy's reaction. Sitting up, she rested her delicate face on her knees. "It's nice to officially meet you, Hyodo Issei. As you might know, I am Rias Gremory, and your new master." Issei seemed to have worked himself out of his nervous state during her speech, realizing that it was unlikely the beauty before him was going to bash his skull in. To Rias' surprise, he seemed quite understanding as he nodded thoughtfully. I see. Flashing her with a goofy, perverse grin, Issei continued. "So the great Rias Oni-sama likes playing the dominatrix. If it is with a beautiful girl like you, I can oblige." Out of nowhere, Issei conjured a rope, a whip, and a dominatrix outfit. And was that a rubber chicken? In his hands. "Shall we begin, master?" Rias' response was a facepalm. Of course the pervert took it the wrong way, and being a sadist is Akino's job. "That wasn't what I meant. I mean that I am a devil and you, Hyodo Issei, are my cute little servant." A pair of bat-like wings appeared behind her to emphasize her point. Issei gave a look. "Are you for real, or is this still your sexual fantasy?" He wanted to be completely sure. As Jiraiya, he had been caught in situations similar, well, not that similar, to this one in the past. Rias sighed, her wings flapping without aid in order to further emphasize the point she had made. "She's obviously serious. I need to know more. Explain." Rias was surprised at the seriousness that the boy displayed. "As I have said, I am a devil, a being born from the underworld, or hell as the books generally calls it." "How exactly does that link with me being a devil and your servant?" "When a human dies, it is possible for a devil to reincarnate them into something called their peerage," Rias replied whilst showing Issei a glowing red chess piece. "It is actually what I did to you last night after that fallen angel attacked you." Issei's mind flashed back to the previous night for the first time that morning. He had more pressing concerns on his mind before, remembering the very deadly date he had been on with Yuma. He did sort of remember a girl approaching him before he had fallen unconscious. It seemed like that girl was Rias Gremory. Who, Issei had realized, given what she had said and the timing of her appearance, had been extremely opportunistic to acquire him as a servant. "Well, at least she's hot, but if she thinks I'll accept this, no strings attached, she'll be in for a surprise." Rias smiled, getting off the bed and walking over to Issei's desk chair where she had placed her clothes. I know it's a bit to process, but I will explain what everything means later on after school. Issei, it's time to wake up, came the cheery voice of Issei's mother through the now open doorway. She immediately froze as she realized the situation she had walked in on. Issei could not really do anything but stare at his mother then back at Rias a few times. Issei decided that after everything that happened today, he deserved a little fun. Ka-chan, your son has finally graduated into a man. Genuine tears of happiness seemed to be welling in his eyes. His cheek was promptly pulled painfully by the noble hand of the clearly irritated Rias Gremory. Hyodo Issei proved to be quite an enigma for Rias Gremory. During her observations of the brown-haired boy, she had, along with Akeno, concluded that the kid was a mere simple-minded pervert who led the perverted trio and enjoyed writing down every even slightly sexual experience he had into a small notepad. It seemed that whilst her conclusion was true, proven by the fact that during their walk to school Issei had stayed slightly behind her so that he could stare at her admittedly, delectable behind, not that she minded, Issei was far more intelligent, genuine and manipulative than she had initially given him credit for. During their conversation as they walked to school, Issei had asked her a barrage of seemingly random questions. Whenever she felt the questions drifting into sensitive territory, she had closed the line of questioning. In response, the boy had shrugged, stating his findings, which were all entirely correct, before catching her off guard with some of the most genuine, heartfelt compliments. It seemed like the compliment he had paid her yesterday before his reincarnation was not a one-off thing that she had ever received before he ruined the moment with a goofy smile, a perverse look and an inappropriate comment. They would then lapse into silence for a few moments before he would then start a new line of questioning and the cycle would repeat itself. So far in their 15-minute walk, she had unintentionally revealed to the boy the entire political landscape of the supernatural world, the hierarchy of devils, her opinions on peace and conflict. He seemed very pleased when she had advocated for peaceful coexistence rather than forceful extermination. The inherent nature of devils, what information she had gathered about him and her love for all things anime. She was particularly annoyed about that last one, and yet, despite that, Rias found herself quite liking, and even trusting, the brown-haired pervert. When they had neared the school grounds, she had promised he would get more answers later on in the day. She had also told him that nobody besides himself would remember the existence of Yumaheim. As they passed the school gate, however, their conversation was cut short. It seemed the school's grapevine was in full working condition. Rumors about the great Oni-sama of Kuo Academy being seen with Issei, the leader of the perverted three, had already started flying around the school. What's that loser doing with Rias Oni-sama? I know, right? If anyone should be walking with Rias Oni-sama, it should be me. I can't believe that guy. God damn that pervert. Issei's picked up that last comment. He was truly furious about it. Turning away from Riasheim's ass, Issei quickly pointed at the amassed crowd angrily. Who said I was a pervert? The crowd was stunned into silence. A few moments later a small hand rose up. It belonged to a first-year boy. Issei stared at the boy, assessing him. I believe you are mistaken, young one, I am no pervert. Issei paused dramatically, pleased that he had gotten everyone's attention. For I am a super pervert. An awkward silence followed. A phantom wind blew through the school. That's worse, you idiot. Issei-sama. I have heard that you have slept with Rias Oni-sama today, is it true? Motohama and Matsuda were at Issei's feet, worshipping him. Usually, if the perverted duo had heard even whispers about anyone else at school getting lucky, especially if it was with the top beauty of the school, they would have cursed them, using all their perverted might. That is, in plain English, spreading terrible rumors around the school about said lucky bastard. Motohama and Matsuda were petty like that. But, alas, as loyal followers and fans of the great Hyodo Issei-sama, they could not curse their deity, the very being which brought them the holy series of books known as Icha Icha. Rather they would worship the great man's achievement, offering penance as they wished that doing so would result in their own graduation from virginity. Even Issei had to admit his fellow brother-in-arms were a little deluded in their collective thinking. My faithful followers, it is with great disappointment that I must say that I have not managed to lay with the great beauty of Kuo Academy, Issei told his fellow brethren, his eyes full of tears of manly disappointment, clutching his fist near his face. His face of disappointment, however, turned to one of triumph very quickly. However, my brothers, I am proud to announce here that there will be a crimson-haired beauty in a future book of our beloved series. Motohama and Matsuda immediately cheered, hugging each other in pure elation. However, we must not rest with just this. Motohama, Matsuda. Onward and upward, as I say, to the Kendo Club. The duo immediately saluted, preparing to rush off to the kendo clubhouse peephole. However, before they could get more than a few meters, Issei called out to them. "Before we go, I have to ask you guys, do you remember a girl named Yuma? Black hair, amethyst eyes, fairly large bust, about 160 centimeters tall?" Motohama and Matsuda turned around, surprised to see a serious-looking expression of their usual goofy friend and leader's face. Saluting, again, they answered together, seeing how important this was to Issei. "No, sir. We've never seen or heard of such a beauty. If we do, however, we will do our best to make her a part of the Icha Empire's lineup of female characters." Issei nodded, his face holding its seriousness for a few more moments before changing back to a goofy one. "It's fine, guys. You don't have to do that. In fact, don't go near her. I don't want to see you guys hurt by this fallen angel if she turns aggressive, which judging from what I saw yesterday, she definitely will." Issei's two friends looked confused, though they nodded before scurrying off. The duo had seen that look of concern that Issei's eyes momentarily flashed when he had requested them to stay away and thus would comply because, despite their weird friendship, Issei did always have their best interests at heart. It also seems that Riasheim was right, if Motohama and Matsuda can't remember Yuma, nobody will. Which also means she really is a devil, or at least has some sort of unnatural power. "Hyodo-san," a smooth voice cut through his musing as Issei turned, finding himself looking at the face of the school prince Yuto Kiba. The guy captured the hearts of girls with only a smile and a glance, however Issei always thought his personality was too polite, too distant to be genuine. It actually sort of reminded him of Uchiha Itachi whenever the young man had given him status updates of what Akatsuki was up to. "Rias Bucko sent me here to invite you to our clubroom." Kiba turned, expecting his brown-haired classmate to follow, however after a few steps he realized he could only hear one set of shoes crunching the gravel beneath their feet. Turning, he gave Issei a questioning look. Issei merely gave Kiba a goofy smile as he grabbed his shoulder and literally dragged the blonde boy towards the kendo clubhouse. "I have a prior arrangement, however, so I'll have to go to that first. Please join us." The way Issei was holding onto Kiba meant that his request wasn't exactly a request. "Hyodo-san, I'd rather not," Kiba said, a polite smile adorning his face, though Issei noticed the small beads of sweat on his forehead. "Nonsense. We are fellow men, and as fellow men we must bond in our mutual respect of the female body. Now, Kiba, follow us and don't be ashamed to show the world your inner desires." Kiba cried silently as he was dragged away towards the kendo peephole. As Issei dragged off Kiba, his eyes wandered subtly towards the shaking branch of a nearby tree. "I wonder what you were doing spying on me, Saji Genshiru." A little while later, Issei stood back as Kiba knocked on the door of what he presumed to be the Occult Research Club's clubroom. They had, along with Matsuda and Motohama, escaped relatively unscathed, while their bodies were intact, after the members of the kendo club had, unsurprisingly, found them, well, 3 of the 4 men there, peeking. After a few seconds a graceful voice beckoned them to enter. The room the male duo entered was Gothic in style and clearly fit the theme of the club it housed. The chalkboard was filled with strange symbols and writing. The table had skulls and candles on them, and in the center of the room was a chalk drawing of a large and complicated circle that Issei quickly discerned did not find its roots in Fuinjutsu. His eyes, however, were quickly drawn to the very cute, because as a super pervert Issei could and would appreciate all women, regardless of their shape or size. Very petite girl sitting on the couch in the corner of the room munching on some Japanese sweets. Issei knew who she was, of course. Who at Kuo didn't? Taju Koneko, the so-called mascot of the school, was truly the definition of a loli. Despite being 15, she had the body of an elementary school student, her face also not looking out of place if it were to appear of a girl far younger than herself. In fact, it was due to her youthful appearance that Issei had, using his mandate as the leader of the perverted trio, declared that the pure loli before him would forever remain uncharted territory in their heroic Icha research endeavors. Well, maybe not forever, but Issei and his minions would try not to conduct research on her too much. Her white hair was cut into a short bob besides 2 long bangs making their way down past her shoulders and the rest of her fringe hanging over her forehead, stopping before they reached her hazel eyes, which were bereft of any significant emotion besides enjoyment as she gobbled the sweets in her hand. On either side of her hair were black, cat-shaped hair clips. Now that Issei was close to her than he had ever been before, he realized that she truly did resemble a kitten of some sort. On the other side of the room sat a truly busty beauty. Her bosom was even larger than Riasheim's. Though still short of Tsunade Heim's 106 centimeters. Even sitting, her ass seemed to be perfect and her legs stretched on for miles. Adding to the image of pure beauty was long black hair was tied into a ponytail, A pretty face smiled at me. She was a true Yamato Nadeshiko. This girl was, along with Rias Haim, one of the two great Oni-samas of Kuo Academy. Issei decided that this was a great club. It would be even better if joining it didn't involve any of that devil stuff Rias had mentioned earlier. Era. Hello, my name is Himejima Akeno. Pleased to make your acquaintance. Who might you be? Akeno asked despite the fact Issei knew the black-haired beauty knew who he was. Smirking, the brown-haired pervert adopted a kabuki pose. Listen up and listen well, you chicks. The most holy student of Kuo Academy. The super pervert of Japan. Meet the great Hyodo Issei-sama of the perverted three. His introduction was met with a brief silence before it was broken by Akeno's giggles. Hyodo Issei-kun? I have heard that you were the writer of the Icha Icha series, is that right? Issei brightened considerably at that. Despite telling everyone he knew that he was the great author of the Icha Icha series, and having his name printed on all of them, none of his classmates had believed him. That is except for Matsuda and Motohama. You are correct, Akeno-hime. I am the accomplished and worshipped author of the greatest book series in the world. Icha Icha is guaranteed to be the most accurate scenes in the series of erotica with all the research done personally by yours truly. Kiba grimaced slightly, his mind going back to the so-called research that he had unwillingly partaken in. Zooming across the room so that he was standing behind the black-haired Oni-sama, Issei brought out a stack of paper out of nowhere. This is the draft for the next installment. Icha Icha. The sadistic priestess and the masochist shinobi. I have a feeling that I have found the inspiration for the female lead. Akeno-hime, if my super pervert senses aren't wrong, which they never are, I shall start my research immediately. Just as Akeno was about to give a seductive response to the brown-haired pervert's ramblings, Issei brought out a familiar-looking bra. 102 centimeters, Akeno-hime. Truly you have a body blessed by divine beings. With a body like this you can do onto me whatever you wish, Issei said, drool coming out his mouth as his imagination ran away from him. It wasn't well known but Jiraiya and by extension Issei had a bit of a masochist streak in him when a hot lady was involved. And calling someone like Akeno hot was something of a gross understatement. On the couch, Kiba was merely smiling awkwardly at the whole encounter whilst Koneko was staring ahead emotionlessly, her attention on the sweets before her, though if one were to pay particular attention they would hear the school mascot muttering about perverted senpais. For some reason or another, Issei found it just made the little lowly girl more endearing. Just as Issei finished talking, it finally hit Akeno why that bra looked so familiar. Groping herself, she confirmed her suspicions. It seemed that Issei had managed to steal the bra Akeno was wearing without anyone noticing and without having to do anything to the dark-haired beauty's outer clothes. Instead of getting angry like any other girl in her position, Akeno merely giggled as a sadistic glint entered her eye. Era, it seems we have an interesting person, right bucko? Suddenly the curtain in the corner of the room opened and Rias stepped out, drying her hair with a towel. A shower in a clubroom. What a place. Giving everyone in the room a smile, Rias threw her towel to one side before clapping her hands together. Now that you're here, Issei, I would like to introduce you to the Occult Research Club. Taking a seat she continued, but as you know that's merely a cover. Everyone here is a devil and members of my peerage. Nodding, Issei's expression turned slightly more serious as he asked, and what exactly does that mean? Am I to serve your every whim? Suddenly Issei appeared behind Rias, in a butler's costume as he massaged the crimson-haired girl's back. His perverted expression turned back on in full power. Because I am perfectly fine to serve as the male lead in any one of your sexual fantasies, master, Issei said in a loyal tone. Akeno giggled, licking her lips. It seemed like Issei was a very interesting person in her opinion. She was getting ideas. A lot of wonderful ideas. Koneko, on the other hand, merely pointed at Issei with a blank expression, arrow. Kiba was thinking that maybe he shouldn't have woken up today, or any other day in the future where stuff like this was going to happen. Which Kiba realized was probably going to be every day of his extended devil life now that Issei was a member of Rias' peerage. Rias blushed. Who knew Issei was so good at giving massages? He was working out all the kinks in her back. I said earlier that's not what I meant. What I mean is that you are in essence my servant, someone who now serves the Gremory clan. The crimson-haired girl grimaced internally. That had come out somewhat more haughty than she had intended. From behind her Issei nodded, as he continued massaging the crimson-haired girl, who moaned erotically every few moments. Akeno was quite turned on by the display. After a couple of minutes Issei finally spoke. So what do you exactly expect of me if I am your servant but am not here to satisfy your sexual appetite? Rias shot the brown-haired pervert a look over her shoulder, She didn't really mind how perverted the guy was, but couldn't he be a bit more serious? Though Issei ignored it, his eyes hardening when they met Ria's aqua blue ones. And what if I refuse? Suddenly the atmosphere in the room grew cold and Issei's previously soft, soothing hands clutched painfully down onto Ria's shoulders, who was now cursing herself for her prior wish. She would much prefer the goofy Issei over whatever this was. Everyone in the room tensed. Koneko had stood up, her sweets lying forgotten on the coffee table. Kiba had summoned a sword and held it battle-ready. Akeno had her fingers curled as lightning began to course around her as they prepared to attack the self-proclaimed super pervert. Unfortunately for them, the way he was holding onto Rias meant they had no clear shot. Issei wouldn't normally use a girl, especially one as beautiful as Rias, like this, but he felt that given her actions, or rather inaction, last night she had it coming. Just a little bit. He was also essentially putting money in their pocket at the same time. Never let someone you just met, no matter how much you think you know them and how harmless they may seem, into your personal space. Whilst the Issei of yesterday would have probably accepted this sudden influx of information with nothing more than mere surprise, the Issei who stood in the occult research club room now, with the memories of Jiraiya, was not so naive. Whilst I believe that your intentions might not have been malicious or sinister, Rias Gremory, your actions certainly could be interpreted as such. Don't think I haven't seen through your ruse. You could have approached my recruitment in a very different manner, by simply asking me to join at any point, or, if worst came to worst, by intervening prior to Yuma's otherwise fatal attack and then asking for me to join as a sign of my gratitude to my savior. But, no, you created a situation where I couldn't refuse. And, no matter how beautiful I find you, I don't appreciate that. As Issei finished the pseudo-lecture to the crimson-haired beauty, Kiba suddenly appeared behind him, the pommel of his sword coming down to try and knock out the self-proclaimed super pervert. Without even moving his arms or turning his head, Issei simply stuck his foot out, catching the blonde-haired Bishonen's stomach, sending him reeling backwards into the wall. The force of the kick was by no means deadly, but it was enough to keep Kiba from standing back up straight away. The original members of the Occult Research Club were shocked. Kiba was after all a very talented knight, one whose speed should be unmatched by that of a newly reincarnated devil, whose combat prowess was only slightly below that of Akino's and Rias in the peerage. And yet, Issei had nonchalantly stopped his impending attack and injured the blonde knight in one move. Pretty quick, Gaki, but I've seen faster, Issei snorted as his eyes still bored into Rias' startled ones. The brown-haired pervert's mind briefly drifted to Namikaze Minato, Maeda Gai and Uchiha Shisui. Though, you are 100 years too early to challenge the epitome of manliness. Hopefully the others won't do anything else drastic. I quite like all of them and they haven't really done anything against me. My bone to pick is with Rias alone. Shifting his hands slightly so that his grip was no longer painful for Rias, Issei continued where he left off, though his tone softened. I understand that you probably did all this out of desperation, Riasheim. From our chat earlier, you don't exactly seem autocratic. Rather, you are someone who values those who are close to you, that you're somewhere that cherishes the bonds you have made, who ultimately respects your friends' decisions. The reaction of your peerage members right now only supports this. I find that quite admirable about you. But you need to think before you do something this life-changing to someone who is essentially a stranger, no matter how desperate you are. Suddenly Issei disappeared from his spot from behind Rias and reappeared near the door, surprising the other occupants, especially Kiba, who realized that the brown-haired pervert was not that much slower than him, in the room with his speed, his normal uniform replacing his gag butler one. Given all that, I have ultimately decided that you, Rias Gremory, need to prove to me that you and all this devil business are worth my time. After all, my time is a valuable commodity. My most valued readers are all waiting faithfully for the next installment of the world's greatest book series. Issei turned to leave, not before winking at Akeno and Koneko, waving his hand lazily towards the devils in the room. However, he stopped when Rias who stood and called out to him. Rias' mind was a mess at the moment. She didn't want to lose Hyodo Issei, not because he was a wielder of a sacred gear, the holder of 8 of her pawns, the only fighting chance she had to get out of her current accursed predicament, but rather because she wanted to know him more, to show him that she wasn't a waste of time, to not disappoint his expectations of her. The way that Issei had looked at her when he talked to her, when he had listed off her better attributes, was one that showed that the brown-haired pervert had expected these things from Rias Gremory, the 17-year-old student of Kuo Academy, and not Rias Gremory, the heiress of one of 72 pillars. Rias didn't want that look, that expectation from the first person, because even the likes of Akeno, Koneko and Kiba had, in the beginning, seen her high standing in Devil Society before they had seen Rias Gremory, who had, upon their initial meeting, seen her as something more than her title to be misplaced. Furthermore, that feeling of trust, that feeling of fondness that she had felt earlier towards the brown-haired pervert before her was still very much intact despite recent events. Rather than wanting to order Issei to stop, as she usually would, because even Rias had to admit she typically reacted badly to rejection, she wanted to prove herself to him. It was an odd feeling, one that was foreign to Rias. She hadn't even felt this way when her beloved Oni-sama or Oto-sama had requested something of her. Stepping forward so that she was in front of her desk, Rias, in line with her peerage members, Kiba had gotten up in her inner musings and had relocated himself next to Akeno, showing that she saw her peerage members as equals, as people she cherished. Hyodo Issei, I will show you that your initial read on me isn't wrong. I'll prove to you that we are worth your time, that I am the person you first thought me to be. Beside her, Akeno, Koneko and Kiba nodded strongly, confirming their king's statement. And not out of a sense of obligation, Issei noted, but rather because they believed in their king, their leader. Issei merely gave them a grin before he turned back to the door, his hand held in a goodbye gesture. Despite everything, Rias Gremory, I have a feeling that you will exceed my expectations. Issei sighed as he looked out the window opposite the door of the Occult Research Club. Just as Minato and Naruto did. After the dressing down he had given Rias Gremory, Hyodo Issei traveled to the outskirts of Kuo town where an abandoned field was located. Along the super pervert had noticed he had gained a tail, one that Issei, for the life of him, couldn't shake off. It was quite concerning, as the former spymaster of Konoha and Hai no Kuni Issei was better than most when it came to misdirection and stalking, and yet whoever was following him was obviously privy to all of Issei's tricks. Which either meant that his stalker was familiar with all the tricks taught to high-level Konoha shinobi or they could somehow pinpoint his location. Neither explanation of which was particularly comforting for Issei. After an hour of traveling one way, double back, going into various alleyways or dense streets, Issei arrived at the open field, his shadow sticking close. Turning towards a tree situated on the other side of the area, Issei decided it was time this proverbial game of cat and mouse came to an end. You've been following me the whole day, why don't you come out and face me like a man, Saji Genshiru? Leaves rustled as the aforementioned secretary of Kuo Academy's student council landed gracefully on the ground before the tree. Saji wore a polite smile, one of his hands scratching his head sheepishly, though his eyes were calculating as they bored into Issei's. What a coincidence seeing you here, Hyodo-san. I was just planning on using this field, actually. Issei snorted. We both know you've been following ever since I got to school today. Now why don't we get to the point? Issei pointed a finger dramatically at his blonde-haired classmate. If the blonde wanted to be innocent and clueless, well two can play at that game. Are you envious I arrived at school with Riasheim? I never picked you for the jealous type, Saji. Saji's sweat dropped in response but his expression quickly took a serious turn. Let's skip the stupidity, Hyodo-san. We both know you are different from yesterday. How you hold yourself, the way you talk, the way you recognized that I was following you. Whilst some of that could be explained by your change into a devil, the way you tried to lose me can't be. Those methods are not something that anyone should know. So now, Hyodo-san, I want to know. Who are you? Issei's eyes narrowed. So Saji knew about devils and was likely one himself. That was interesting to know, especially given that the blonde-haired second year wasn't at the Occult Research Club room with Rias, indicating that there was another devil, another king, within Kuo Academy. So you're a devil too, Saji? That's nice to know. And what do you mean who am I? I am the great Hyodo Issei-sama of the pervert trio. Saji's eyes were still hardened gems as they bored into Issei's, ignoring the brown-haired pervert's first question in his little dance. You know what I mean. You may be Hyodo Issei but I know you are someone else at the same time. And whoever you are, I can sense that you are a powerful entity. An unknown variable at Kuo Academy who could potentially hurt my friends, my king. Especially after the display in the Occult Research Room, it would seem that Rias Gremory has no control over your actions. You are thus accountable to no one and your actions unpredictable as a result. Therefore I need to know who you are. I need to know if you will turn against devils, regardless of their allegiance or what they stand for. I will not let you or anyone harm my comrades, my family. Hyodo Issei outwardly remained calm, though his mind was analyzing the situation frantically. Saji was proving to be quite the insightful and mysterious individual. A dangerous combination, Issei noted. After the silence between the two second years had lasted nearly a full minute, Saji finally spoke again, his tone remaining polite though there was a threatening edge to it this time. I have given you the chance to settle this through words, Hyodo-kun. I detest violence but I will do anything to protect my friends. Saji's right hand came up so that two fingers were pointed up, reminiscent of a half-tiger, half-ram seal. In response, Issei's hand came up reciprocating the gesture. Tairitsu no In. The seal of confrontation. The two stood in silence for a few moments before Saji took the preemptive action and moved, a black bug suddenly like gauntlet appearing on the blonde's left hand. A black vine extended out quickly aiming to coil itself around Issei's leg. In response Issei jumped away, avoiding Saji's attack, as he pulled out a kunai and held it in typical defensive fashion, his eyes trained on the blonde. He had an unsettling feeling in his body when Saji smiled slightly, so slightly, Issei was sure someone less perceptive than himself would have missed it, instead of having a more appropriate response to what ended being a futile move. It was then when Issei heard it. For a buzzing sound, one not dissimilar to a running chainsaw had cut through the relative silence of the clearing. Turning his head slightly, he finally saw what had made Saji so confident despite the failed attack. Or rather, Issei realized, the blonde's successful diversion. For a perfect clone of Saji was a meter away, a short tanto raised above his head. Coursing around the tanto was something that Issei didn't think he would ever see performed by someone else, not since he had realized that the energy coursing through him now was not commonplace here. For what was unmistakably whitish-blue lightning chakra encased the bladed weapon perfectly, offering it unparalleled cutting power. Issei barely had any time to react when the sword cut him in two. Rias, a voice greeted the crimson-haired beauty from the door of the nearly empty occult research room. The aqua-eyed girl didn't even bother looking over, already knowing who it was. Rias had requested her presence after all. Sona Sitri, or Suna Shitori as she was more commonly known around the school, was a fellow third year and the president of the student council of Kuo Academy. Sona possessed a cool aura, black hair styled into a short bob, her violent eyes always possessing a calculating edge. And like Rias, was the heiress of one of the 72 pillars virtue of their respective older siblings being passed over due to their inclusion as one of the mouths. It's no wonder the two were best friends whilst growing up. It's quite rare that you would ask to see me like this, Sona said as Rias brought out a chessboard, the pieces already set up. Placing it on the table, Rias allowed Sona to be the white pieces, as the black-haired devil preferred. Sitting, Sona inspected the board for a moment before making the first move. Was there something important you wanted to discuss? Rias nodded, her eyes on the board as she moved her pawn forward, though Sona could tell that her mind was miles away. The violent-eyed devil sighed silently. It seemed like this game wouldn't be as exciting as she had originally anticipated. Yes. I would like to know more about someone. It would seem that I am not as well informed as I had previously thought. Sona nodded, moving her bishop forward. That would seem to be a problem we both share then. Rias looked up to her friend surprised, forgetting the game for a second. What, you are having problems in your peerage as well? Sona absent-mindedly waved her hand to nothing in particular, as she studied the board. I wouldn't say it was a problem per se, but there are certainly some questions I want answered. Rias moved another pawn aimlessly as she pressed Sona for some clarification. Who exactly is causing our student president issues, I wonder? Sona ignored the question, as she inspected the board before advancing a knight. I believe you wanted to discuss your problems, not mine. Rias grunted, giving her friend a look that said she wouldn't get off the hook that easily, as she moved her queen. I am curious about one Hyodo Issei-kun. Sona's eyes flashed with something close to irritation as she moved her knight forward to take Rias' bishop. Rias quickly took Sona's knight in response. The leader of the perverted trio. What problem has he caused now? Rias' sweat dropped slightly. Is he frequently a problem for you? Sona hummed irritably as she moved one of her pieces. As student president, it is my duty to hear complaints and keep myself up to date on various happenings around the school. It would seem Hyodo Issei is mentioned in every single piece of paperwork or rumor I hear. He's especially prominent in the complaints lodged by the girls' kendo club. Sona looked up, her attention moving from the board to Rias momentarily, whilst she adjusted her glasses. It would also seem, according to the rumors, Issei is part of your peerage, Rias. Rias sighed, as she moved her king to avoid check, sort of. Sona raised an eyebrow as she moved her rook forward. Issei is either in your peerage or he isn't. I don't see how there could be a middle ground between the two. We have come to a agreement of sorts. He only agreed to join my peerage in a more committed capacity if I proved to him I was worth his time. Sona glanced up, again, surprised. And you agreed to this? That's remarkably unselfish and uncharacteristic of you, Rias. The crimson-haired beauty shot her friend an irritated look for the jab. Rias was perfectly aware that she was a bit spoilt and selfish. She didn't need her friends pointing that out for her. It's hard to explain, but I don't want to disappoint him. Sona shrugged. It was not her place to intervene in Ria's business, and it wasn't like this little shift in personality was unwelcome. If it was information Rias ultimately wanted, then Sona would help her friend. Hyodo Issei, second-year student of Kuo Academy. Average grades. Self-proclaimed, Japan's #1 super pervert, author of the successful erotic book series, Icha Icha. Has an unidentified sacred gear. Very physically fit, and it would seem has knowledge of how to fight. Despite being a bit of an idiot, he would ultimately be a solid addition to anyone's peerage. Rias sighed as she moved her knight forward into Sona's half of the board. The information from Sona was nearly identical to what she had. The black-haired girl looked up as she quickly took Rias' knight. Rias quickly moved her rook out to take Sona's knight in response. How do you plan on convincing him to be an active member of your peerage if you have decided to play by Issei's rules? I don't need to point out that Riser Phoenix is a problem who only gets closer by the day. I know. Rias grimaced at the reminder of her unwanted fiancé. However, desperation is not an excuse for me to disregard other people's wishes and desires. Desperation, whilst a reason for someone's actions, is not a justification for them. The crimson-haired girl's hand moved so that it was atop her breast, over her heart. I will prove to Issei that I am worth his time on his conditions. Rias couldn't help but echo Issei's earlier sentiment. She didn't know exactly why she had taken the words to heart. Typically she was more stubborn about her views. But Issei had a way of making people think and ultimately learn from him. He would undoubtedly be a fantastic teacher, the crimson-haired girl concluded. The black-haired Seatree family heiress stared at Rias and could only see the determination, the desire to prove herself to Issei burning within the crimson-haired girl's eyes. It had seemed that the usually childish and short-sighted Gremory family heir had grown up a little. The change in maturity was small, yes, but it was telling for Sona that her brown-haired Kahai could force such a change from Rias in less than a day. Looks like this Hyodo Issei has made quite the impression on you, Rias. Finally, Sona moved her queen forward to take Rias' rook. Checkmate, Rias. The black-haired heiress smiled as she studied the board. Rias looked at the chessboard, sighing. Normally Rias would be annoyed that her friend had beat her yet again, but they both knew that the crimson-haired girl's mind was elsewhere during their battle of wits. It would seem like you extend your winning streak, Sona. Rather than the smug neutralness that was Sona's typical reaction to a chess win, Rias was surprised that her friend's expression was more of a mixture between a grimace and embarrassment. After almost half a minute, Sona reluctantly elaborated on her reaction when Rias kept her questioning stare. This would be the start of my new win streak. Rias' face turned to one of surprise. She couldn't believe it. Sona was something of a chess prodigy, one who trained herself tirelessly in the game, which was expected given that the black-haired heiress broke off her unwanted arranged marriage through chess. You mean someone beat you at chess? Recently too? Suddenly Rias' mind flashed to something Sona said earlier in their conversation. Is this the question you wanted answered? Sona didn't give any verbal response. However, in this case silence was incriminating, as the way she fidgeted was an answer enough for Rias. Alas, the crimson-haired devil wanted to know more and thus proceeded to prod and question her fellow heiress. The aqua-eyed girl's stubbornness ultimately coming out the victor against the violet-eyed girl's patience. It was my new pawn, Saji Genshiro. Rias jolted slightly, straightening her back at the name. Wait, Saji Genshiro is a man to my knowledge. Does that mean your promise of marrying the first man to show they're smarter than you? Rias' voice drifted off as her question remained unfinished. Sona's face turned into an odd mixture of disappointment, relief and confusion. I was rejected. That doesn't make sense. From the information I have on Saji Genshiro, he would jump at the chance to marry you. Sona shook her head, her eyes refusing to meet her friend's intensive, curious stare. Ever since I reincarnated him into a devil, as per his wishes, he has been different. He became much less infuriated with me, more focused on protecting my peerage, more perceptive to events going on around the school, more humble. However, at the same time he still retained his kindness, his loyalty, aspects which make Saji. I just don't know what to make of all of it. Rias nodded because she understood her friend's confusion. Something similar had happened to Hyodo Issei after all. This change in personality, and more importantly what caused it, would ultimately require more investigation by the pure-blooded devil duo. However, it was apparent the more curious part of Rias' mind was in control right now, and by the mouth she wanted to know more. But, still, that doesn't explain why Saji would reject you. The black-haired girl's face reddened, her previous cocktail of an expression returning as she whispered a reply so soft that Rias had to strain her ears to hear her friend's response. He said, I was foolish to offer something so important on a condition so arbitrary. That I should save myself for someone I truly see as worthy, that I truly do come to love. Seeing that the dynamic of the conversation had long swung in her favor, Rias tilted her head, her hand coming up to cover her mouth as she giggled nicely. How romantic, Sona grimaced. Embarrassed she had revealed so much to anyone. Normally the violent-eyed girl was more conservative with personal information such as this, but her male pawn had been such an anomaly, someone who had shown himself to be such an outlier from her usually accurate predictions that she couldn't help but vent a little to her friend. It also didn't help that after Saji had said those words, her heart had fluttered in a way it had never fluttered before. Interpret it how you wish, Rias, Sona said, standing, refusing to be subject to what she perceived as ridicule from her friend-cum-rival. When the violet-eyed girl calmed down later, she would see that Rias' comment was more light-hearted than teasing. Ultimately we will have to find out what has made the new members of our peerages change personalities so drastically. Rias nodded, her mind turning from Sona's love chess predicament back to Hyodo Issei as she stared out of a nearby window. Simultaneously Sona also stared out the same window, as their thoughts echoed one another's. Hyodo Issei, Saji Genshiru, I wonder who you really are. Saji's smile turned neutral as he watched from afar as Issei's body was sliced into two, his clone disappearing into smoke. Whilst the blonde had certainly felt a minor high from scoring such a decisive hit on his fellow pawn, it didn't mean he enjoyed what he did. Whilst Hyodo Issei may be an unknown variable, one who had shown knowledge which nobody in this world should possess, he was still a fellow classmate, a fellow devil. Whilst the blonde knew that killing a fellow devil, one who technically hadn't been marked stray, was against the rules, he couldn't care less. Because Saji would do anything, even break the rules, if it was to ensure that his friends, his family, because, even though he had not been a devil long, he felt a strong connection to the black-haired Seatree heiress and her servants, remained safe. It was as the old saying went, whilst it was true that those who break the rules are trash, it was also true that those who abandon their comrades, that those who endanger their comrades' lives through inaction are worse than trash. Saji was broken out of his inner musing when the bloody mess that was formerly known as Japan's #1 super pervert suddenly erupted into smoke. The blonde's eyes widened, his senses going on high alert as he easily recognized the trademark technique. A log. A kawarimi, substitution. Issei must therefore come from that place. Ranjashigami no Jutsu, Wild Lion's main technique. Saji barely jumped in time to avoid the large tangle of lion-shaped brown hair that came hurtling towards his location. Landing 10 meters away, the blonde turned to face his brown-haired opponent, his tanto held in a reverse grip as his feet shifted so that he adopted a perfect fighting stance. The two second-year students of Kuo remained silent, gauging their opponents for any weaknesses, any openings. After a moment, the two pounced, tanto against kunai, fist against fist. Sparks flew as the sound of blocked blows echoed throughout the clearing. To a normal outsider observer, the two were blurs, the duo working each other, each bladed swipe blocked or parried, each kick or punch swatted away or redirected. 2 days, 2 fights, 2 people wanting to off me. Tsunade Heim's luck must be rubbing onto me. I wish something else of Tsunade Heim's was rubbing me. Issei's mind was truly one a pervert. Even in such a serious, life-threatening situation, the author of Icha Icha couldn't keep his mind off the fairer sex and the holy act of procreation. As the two devils descended into close-quarter combat, their deadly dance beginning to gain a rhythm, Issei couldn't help but be amazed by the blonde's combat skills, which was at least on par with his own. The way Saji twisted and turned, the way he compensated for every mistake, created false openings and targeted every one of Issei's opening, spoke volumes about the blonde's strength, the blonde's experience. Experience, which should have taken years to attain, too many years for a modern 17-year-old high school student to access. Issei noted as his eyes narrowed, he immediately opened them wide again, after a tanto swipe came dangerously close to permanently scarring his face, or as Issei liked to call it, the panty dropper. Scratch that, Saji is better than the current me at close-quarter combat. Saji, who obviously saw the near miss as a sign that he was at the advantage, pressed onwards, his tanto raining down from all directions, his legs also coming into play as his moves become more acrobatic. Issei could barely keep up, his hands and legs a blur as he worked overtime to avoid the blows from both limb and blade. After a full nearly half a minute being on the defensive, the super pervert's undertrained muscles began tiring from their non-stop motion, as cuts started to appear on his arms and legs, Saji's tanto beginning to make contact. Sensing that he was starting to be overwhelmed, Issei decided that distance was the key to victory. Thus the brown-haired pervert avoided the next horizontal throat-seeking strike by bending all the way backwards, rather than blocking with his kunai, planting his hands firmly on the ground as he back-flipped, his feet successfully delivering a skull-rattling blow to Saji's jaw. However, even a blow such as that wasn't enough for Issei to gain any breathing room as Saji had quickly recovered. Issei deduced that Saji likely shrouded his jaw with chakra in order to cushion the otherwise devastating impact of his kick, and was closing quickly on Issei. Saji's better than good, he's forcing the situation, aiming to always remain in close quarters, to always remain in his comfort zone and not leave his opponents any breathing room. Remaining calm, Issei hurled his kunai forward to buy himself a few precious seconds before his hands flew through a series of complex hand seals. With my current level of strength, I need to go on the defensive. Hari Jizo. Needle Jizo. Immediately brown-haired extended, hardening as it surrounded Issei's body to prove a protective, yet spiky, cocoon which could protect the super pervert from most attacks. Issei was confident his chakra-enhanced keratin shield could easily deflect any attacks Saji could throw at him. Whilst the level of his jutsu was around that of when he was fighting Orochimaru under the influence of Tsunade's chakra-jumbling drug, his Hari Jizo should have still been able to defend against high-level jutsu on par with Hitaki Kakashi's Chidori. The super pervert was thus shocked that when Saji's blade hit the brown shield, rather than the unmistakable clang of metal deflecting off hardened surface, the buzzing sound of continuous sawing filled in the inner sanctum of his hair. Moving his eyes sidewards, Issei's head was largely immobile whilst he was activating the needle Jizo. He saw his brown hair being penetrated, the beginnings of glinting metal showing inside his keratin shield. Despite the fact that the tanto was aimed right at Issei's neck, the brown-haired pervert was hit with a wave of nostalgia, along with a healthy dose of alarm, when Saji's glistening blade not covered in its previous glorious lightning blue. But rather, the chakra was covered in something different, the manipulation of chakra so unique, that Issei had so seldom seen it that the brown-haired boy couldn't quite remember who was able to change their chakra nature in such a way. For the blade was creating an afterimage of pure snow, the blade being encompassed by white chakra. That must mean, however, with the blade inching closer and closer by the second, Issei had to actively stop his mind from thinking about anything else, actively stop his brain to go to its memory banks to identify who Saji Genshiro really was. For the blonde-haired devil with the blade covered in white chakra was, in Issei's mind, undoubtedly from the elemental nations. The brown-haired boy grimaced as Saji's blade neared, realizing he was in a hopeless, desperate situation. The Hari Jizo was the only thing decreasing the momentum of the threatening blade, yet simultaneously the technique was trapping Issei in a tight space that made evading the space impossible. Issei was truly between a rock and a hard place. With the blade half a foot away from making solid contact, Issei's scowl deepened as he desperately brought his left arm, encompassing it with a thick layer of wind-natured chakra, in a last valiant attempt to lessen exactly how life-threatening the blow would be. The newly reincarnated devil knew that the act was meaningless. Even if Saji's blade didn't permanently sever his arm, the limb would essentially be useless for the rest of the fight. Which in a fight like this, where his opponent was strong, likely stronger than him, meant that Issei would ultimately lose. The loss of a limb was just one of the reasons that Issei had ultimately lost the fight against pain. That and the fact that the god of aim possessed 6 external bodies in the eyes of the Rakudo Sennin. Issei's mind jumped, going back to the thoughts that had plagued his mind when he had faced death or near death 4 times earlier. Tsunade, bashing, Naruto's four-tailed form, his battle for pain and the one-sided fight against Yuma. A shinobi is determined by the way he dies, by what he achieves before his death, and not the way he lives, and I have yet to achieve anything of note as Hyodo Issei. I don't want to die without achieving anything. The brown-haired devil closed his eyes momentarily whilst he unconsciously channeled even more chakra to his arm in response to his desperation to not lose, to not die at the hand of Saji Genshiro. However, before Saji's tanto made contact he felt something in his left arm change, and not in the same dismembering way it had changed when pain had blown his left arm off. Rather the feeling was empowering, like somehow the power in his arm had doubled, that the limb had somehow becoming bulkier. Opening his eyes, Issei was surprised to see that his arm was now enshrouded by a red gauntlet that extended from the tips of his fingers to his elbow, a green gem shining on the back. In fact, Issei's gauntlet was reminiscent of the one currently mounted on Saji's wrist. However, the former's was much grander in appearance. From his peripheral vision he could see that Saji was equally shocked by the appearance of Issei's gauntlet. And to the surprise of both Issei and Saji, when the tanto hit the red contraption on the former's arm, the chakra-enhanced blade bounced off rather than cutting through. The blonde cursed internally, about to try to cut his brown-haired counterpart once again, when suddenly a deep booming voice originating from Issei's arm suddenly spoke, the sound echoing through the clearing. Boost. A surge of power suddenly pulsed through Issei as his jutsu, his body, his chakra suddenly seemed to double in intensity, in its strength. The super pervert could feel it when his Hari Jizo hardened, guaranteeing nothing would breach it again, its spikes elongating to the point that they were nearly a meter long. From Saji's point of view, Issei looked like he had just evolved from a baby porcupine to the most grand of its spiky species. Grateful for whatever was making him stronger, Issei realized his Harijizo, intent on to confirming who he thought Saji was. White chakra, Tanto, Kenjutsu, great loyalty to his comrades. Meanwhile, Saji's mind, which had just come out of its adrenaline-fueled battle blur, was going through a similar thought process. Hair-based jutsu, perverted, great knowledge of espionage techniques. Both Saji and Issei stared at each other, their eyes communicating. The next jutsu would be the final jutsu for this fight. They weren't going to aim to kill any longer, but to aim to confirm something to each other. Chakra shrouded the two second-year Kuo students as they both crouched ready to release their signature techniques. Saigo no Shiroi Sarashu, final white slash, bright white chakra shape burned around Saji's Tanto with intensity that was unmatched throughout the fight. Odama Rasengan, big ball Rasengan, a large ball of blue chakra suddenly spun, hovering above the red gauntlet on Issei's left hand. The two flashed to each other, their attacks meeting, canceling each other out, as they continued forward until the both landed, crouching 10 meters between them, their backs facing each other. Suddenly Issei spoke for the first time since the fight had started, his words echoing that of the sensei of the legendary Sannin. Where the tree leaves dance, one shall find flames. The fire's shadow will illuminate the village, and once again, tree leaves shall bud anew. Both Issei and Saji smiled as the blonde finished off the famous quote. This was the final confirmation they needed. Turning around, their hands, they walked towards each other until their fingers met, overlapping each other. Wakai no In. The seal of reconciliation. You haven't changed much, have you, Jiraiya? I can say the same back to you, Hitaki Sakumo. After doing some cooling down exercises, the duo that formerly possessed white hair lay on the ground, looking at the sky, observing the world as time passed. Looks like I won again, Saji said, a teasing tone to his voice. Issei humphed, his eyes focused on a particular cloud which had taken the shape of a sexy lady. I wonder if I can include something about clouds into my next book. I think it was a draw, Sakumo. If that makes you feel better, I'm still in front 30-20, though. I think it was something like 49-1. With me in front, and you cheated that one time. The blonde snorted, his eyes also latching onto a particular cloud which shaped itself into a scarecrow, still as boastful as ever, Jiraiya. Well, looks like someone won't be getting the next issue of Icha Icha, Sakumo. The blonde let out something resembling a gurgled gasp in response, because Kakashi's perversion had to come from somewhere. Issei merely smirked as Saj begrudgingly conceded defeat. Fine, it was a draw. The duo fell into a comfortable silence, as they continued to stare at the sky. Nearly 10 minutes passing before Issei's soft voice interrupted the tranquility of the afternoon. Do you remember how? Saji shook his head, his eyes still trained on the clouds above. No, before I was reincarnated I was just Saji Genshiro, a lonely teen with doubts festering his mind, a boastful person, a boy who embodied loyalty but ultimately with no one to be loyal to. Then Sona Surtree saved me, offering me a place in her peerage, in her family. Her goals were one which I could adopt, ones which I can support with all my might. Then when I became a devil I remembered. Everything. Do you regret remembering? Number? Saji moved his head so that he could stare at Issei to properly convey his next statement. Because the last thing I remember from the elemental nations was Kakashi forgiving me. And whilst I still have regrets over how I died, over aspects of the life I lived, to have my son forgive me allowed me to look back on my life with a smile. Issei, who was eyeing Saji from the corner of his eye, nodded. Whilst he found Saji's statement odd, Issei could distinctly remember that Sakumo had died without anyone by his side. That Sakumo died with the contempt of his son. He didn't doubt his friend's word. If this whole reincarnation business taught him anything, it was that death was unpredictable. More so than even Naruto. And not many things were more unpredictable than that blonde knucklehead. And Issei ultimately understood what his friend meant. Realizing that Uzumaki Naruto was the child of the prophecy in his final moments had a similar effect on him too. Looking back on one's life with regret, and, yet, also with a smile. And so you decided to support Sona with your strength. That sexy school president sure is lucky. Or are you the one who is lucky? Issei's eyebrows waggling suggestively. Saji gave his friend a disapproving look. He obviously knew Issei's personality well, but that didn't mean the blonde liked being the center of gossip. Issei quickly averted his eyes as he shuffled a couple of inches away from Saji. Despite what he said earlier, Issei knew that Hitaki Sakumo, Konoha's White Fang, was one of the few people who could surpass him in battle. And Issei didn't really want to fight Kakashi's father again, even if doing so would shed some light on whatever the thing previously on his left arm was. The blonde sighed, his eyes looking at the clouds once again. My heart is very much still with my wife right now. Saji smiled lightly as the cloud reshaped itself into the beautiful silhouette of his wife, of Kakashi's mother. As I'm sure Tsunade is still very much in yours. The brown-haired boy nearly choked on his tongue, his eyes quickly darting from Saji's peaceful face to the clouds above. He cursed in his mind slightly as the cloud which had previously been a beautiful, anonymous woman had reshaped itself into that of Tsunade Heim. Does it matter, Sakumo? Tsunade Heim found love with Dan. And it's not like she'll be here. The Tsunade Heim-shaped cloud seemed to waft over to another which was shaped like Kato Dan. That good-for-nothing ghost-walking bastard, far off, a third cloud shaped like his old self, complete with an oil forehead protector, seemed to look on in envy. The blonde looked over to his counterpart, his voice full of hope. You never know, Jiraiya. I think the fact that we are here, now, shows that death can be full of surprises. Issei knew what Saji really meant with that statement. With the revelation that he wasn't the only one from the elemental nations that was reborn here, the blonde was obviously hoping that one day he would see his wife again. I wish I had your hope, Sakumo. Issei got up, dusting himself off. He was tired after the fight and he really needed to catch up on his research. He needed to do something to shake off this heavy conversation, and what better way was there to get up one's spirit than appreciating female beauty? Jiraiya, I prefer Issei. It is only fair to this incarnation of me that who I currently am is not overshadowed by who I was, Saji. And I prefer Sakumo when we are in private, Issei. I don't want to forget who I was, who I am. The brown-haired boy smiled sadly as he looked back at Saji. Looks like even though we can look back on our time as shinobi proudly, we still retain our flaws, still retain our old regrets. You still keep forgetting to focus on the present, being too mindful of others' opinion of you. Saji shook his head as he reciprocated Issei's sad smile. And despite how much you want Hyodo Issei to be a new chapter in your existence, Jiraiya, you still allow your failures to define you. You still let your wish for a glorious death, to let fate and not your own will dictate the path your life leads. Issei didn't respond as he began walking away, however he stopped when Saji called out to him. Issei, let this chance of being a devil be a way to move on, a way to allow you to be Hyodo Issei and not Jiraiya of the Sannin. Iz looked back at Saji from the corner of his eye. Rias Gremory still needs to show to me she's someone I can follow, someone who I can respect. Whilst I agree that the way Rias got you to join her peerage was not well thought out, she is, as you said, ultimately not a bad person. I know that you also feel that she has a vast unrealized potential in strength of character, strength of heart and strength of body. I know you said you'd give her a chance, but I don't mean just sit and wait for her to do things herself unilaterally. Give her a real chance. Get to know her peerage, know her goals. Create bonds with them. Be friends with them. If Rias Gremory is anything like Sona Citri, then I guarantee you won't be disappointed. And ultimately if I am wrong you'll know that it will be entirely her fault, that you did your part, that you gave yourself a chance. Issei glanced back at Saji from the corner of his eye before turning his back straight and walking off. Being a devil is a new chance, huh? We'll see, Sakumo. At a nearby candy store Tuju Koneko swiveled her head around in search for something, her animalistic senses screaming at her. She could smell it. The scent of a perverted toad and a loyal canine. The white-haired girl shuddered internally as she thought of the evil four-legged creatures known as dogs. But more importantly, more alarmingly, was the familiar hum of chakra pulsing from somewhere close by. Her nature as a nekosho made her extra sensitive to this specific type of energy. And the little white-haired girl was hesitant to pursue the source, because the only time the hazel-eyed 15-year-old had sensed power even remotely comparable to this was back when she was around her Oni-sama, and yet, she was curious about it at the same time. Clutching her priceless sweets to her budding chest, Koneko started to walk towards the origin of the reverberating power, ignoring her animalistic instincts. The hazel-eyed rook also ignored the sinister, sarcastic voice at the back of her mind. Curiosity killed the cat. After 10 minutes of searching, when Koneko had finally zeroed in on the location where she felt the chakra coming from, a nearby clearing by Ko Academy, she was startled to see a brown-haired boy dusting himself off as another blonde-haired boy sat on the ground. Instantly she recognized the duo. The brown-haired boy's identity was obvious. Even if his infamous reputation didn't precede him, the guy had caused quite a stir with his earlier showing in the occult research room. It seemed like Hyodo Issei was truly the epicenter of problems and questions that were rising up recently. The blonde guy, however, Koneko had never met before. Well, not officially at the least, though she knew who he was. Rias Bucco had briefly considered the possibility of getting him to join the Grammary Peerage even before Issei had made it onto the crimson-haired girl's radar. Genshiro Saji, the newly appointed secretary of the student council. Seeing the two pawns holding a serious conversation, Koneko quietly walked up to them with her natural feline stealthiness, using the trees as cover. And ultimately, if I am wrong, you'll know that it will be entirely her fault, that you did your part, that you gave yourself, a chance. Koneko saw Issei turn his head to regard the other boy slightly as he replied in a melancholy tone that the white-haired girl would have never attributed to the usually goofy brunette. We'll see, Tsukumo. Seeing that Issei was about to walk away and that with him any answers would leave too, Koneko quickly maneuvered herself so that she was blocking the brown-haired boy off. Issei was baffled to see the proclaimed school mascot standing there. He wasn't so concerned about the white-haired girl overhearing anything since he hadn't sensed her near the clearing until literal moments ago. His confusion only grew when the Neko girl pointed a finger at him, her face emotionless. Chakra. The super pervert looked at the girl slightly alarmed, his eyes following her pointing hand as its target swapped from him to Saji. Chakra. Promptly Saji and Issei exchanged a long look, conversing through their eye movements. How does Koneko know anything about chakra, Issei? I don't know, you know me. I didn't tell her, I guess it doesn't matter at the moment. What we need to do now is make sure she's not in the know about us. Trump cards and keeping information close and all, but more importantly, I'm not letting anyone know that I'm mentally older than the teachers at Kuo. Hey, if you're mentally old, what am I? I'll have you know that I will not lose to any man younger than me when it comes to my stamina in bed. Youth doesn't mean anything when compared to experience. It seems like you'll also not lose to anyone when it comes to stupidity, Issei. Just come up with something. Why is it that every time we're in these situations it's me that has to talk our way out of it? You're the one who's a professional author. You should know how to spin a story out of nothing. My stories have no plot, Tsukumo. You know this. Well, you're the spymaster. You should be able to talk your way out of anything. Fine. But you owe me, Tsukumo, not as much as you owe me. To the white-haired rook it seemed like the former shinobi duo were simultaneously having some sort of mild seizure as their eyes moved around erratically in their eye sockets. However, before Issei could open his mouth to come up with a ridiculous, because everyone knew what would come out of the brown-haired boy's mouth would be in some way perverted explanation, Koneko spoke up, her hands moving from Issei to Saji. I smell toad and dog. The white-haired girl's typically monotone voice took a distinctive negative turn as she mentioned the latter animal. However, I can also sense you are not Yukai. Why do you have chakra? Saji crossed his arms as decided to converse with the young girl, his eyes curious. What do you know about chakra? Koneko turned her head slightly, her eyes filled with distinct though unmalicious dislike. I don't like dogs, Inubaka. The white-haired girl promptly ignored Saji. The blonde reincarnated devil sweat dropped, a polite smile still adorning his face as he looked at Issei with an expression that was obviously asking for help. The brown-haired boy sighed. It looked like you would have been the one getting Koneko to talk. Koneko-chan, it would seem like you know much about chakra. However, given that you can sense that we are not Yukai yet you also made a point of this being odd thanks to the chakra in our possession, it would suggest that only Yukai can possess chakra. Interesting. Issei's eyes, which had taken on a more serious and analytical tint, as opposed to their usual goofy and perverted tone that the windows to his soul usually took, were now studying Koneko thoroughly as the perverted pawn rubbed his chin. Whilst her face didn't show it, the hazel-eyed first-year was feeling slightly nervous with just how intently Issei was looking at her. Koneko almost preferred for the recently reincarnated devil to look at her with the perverted eyes he bore back before in the occult research room. Almost. What you have said would also imply that you are either an expert on Yukai and chakra or, more likely, is that you are a Yukai yourself. If I hazard a guess, given my impression of how you felt when I first saw you, I would say that you are a cat Yukai of Japanese legend. A Nekomata. From the corner of his eye Issei could see a look of realization wash over Saji's face. Tsukumo was never much of a people person, even back in the elemental nations, whilst, at the same time, Koneko's typical emotionless visage was now saturated with shock. The trio stayed in silence for nearly a minute before Issei sighed and gave a meaningful look to Saji. She's uncomfortable with new, unknown people around Tsukumo, and since she's part of my team, I'll stay. Saji nodded without saying a word, his hands coming up to form a half-ram seal with his fingers before he vanished in a puff of white smoke and a shower of gentle leaves. There was no harm in showing Koneko some of his techniques. The blonde was sure that Issei would somehow keep the white-haired girl quiet. He was very persuasive like that. But before he left, Issei had seen the meaningful look that Saji had given him before sunshining away. Create bonds with them. Be friends with them. Kaneko's shocked eyes made her head turn so that she was now staring at the empty space which was previously occupied by Saji. The catgirl had never seen anyone just disappear, she could put it in no other way. Like that. Sure. Devils used teleportation magic, but that took time to set up and prepare, not to mention that the transit wasn't instantaneous. She had barely felt the small flicker of chakra come from Saji before he disappeared. Issei sighed, sensing that the sole rook of the Gremory peerage was now both extremely uncomfortable and shocked. Fortunately for him, he was great with kids. Well, that one time he had to look after Agaki, the kid didn't die. He placed a hand on top of the girl's head and started rubbing it as he offered her one of his goofy smiles. Don't worry about it, Kaneko-chan. You being a Nekomata doesn't really change anything. Immediately, Koneko relaxed under the ministration, her mind floating back to a warning that Rias had given her peerage after Issei had left the occult research room. Watch out what you say to Issei-kun. He has an uncanny ability to get people to talk, to process information, to change from being the interrogated to being the interrogator. It looked like the crimson-haired girl's observation of the super pervert and her warnings held a lot of merit, for Koneko felt like she somehow changed from being the hunter to the hunted. Furthermore, despite Kaneko's initial impression of Issei as a lecherous, bumbling idiot, the brown-haired youth was currently projecting a wise and calming aura, one that you could not help but let out your worries to, one that you could not help but trust. Why yes, I am a Nekosho, a subspecies of Nekomata. The duo talked until the sun set and the moon rose, illuminating the starry night sky. It was odd, the mascot of Kuo Academy noted, she had never been a particularly open person, even before her Onisama had learnt senjutsu and left. And yet, here she was, divulging information about herself, some of which she had never shared with even the likes of Rias Bucko or Akano. To a boy who she barely knew, a boy who she initially thought of as a non-redeemable, shameless pervert. But now she knew that this person who she was having a conversation with was certainly more complex, more thoughtful, more caring, more perceptive than she had ever imagined upon meeting him earlier in the day. And not only that, the brown-haired boy was listening to her patiently, never judging her, only offering acceptance and support where she had expected fear and disgust. And despite not sharing her deepest secrets, her greatest fears to Issei that night, when she had left, Koneko felt lighter than she had ever felt. It wasn't until the next day where Koneko realized that neither Issei nor Saji had answered her initial question. When Issei's head hit the pillow later on that night, he was almost instantly asleep, the events of the day proving to be extremely tiring. However, to his great annoyance, the day of extraordinary revelations didn't seem to be over yet, for when Issei opened his eyes again, they were met with a world overflowing in the color red. Instantly, Issei knew he was in a dream. The fact that he wasn't staring at his prized, autographed poster of his favorite AV star was indication enough that he was no longer in his room. And not a good dream, Issei realized as he noted the distinct lack of buck-naked, sexy women. Suddenly and without much warning, a booming voice cut through the silence of the red space. It would seem like I have hit the jackpot with you, Hyodo Issei. Startled and turning towards the origin of the voice, Issei was internally alarmed to see a massive western dragon lying down. How did he miss it in the first place? Nearby. Or should I say, Jiraiya of the Densetsu no Sanin, Issei's body instantly tensed, his chakra pulsating through and around him. Who are you? Do you come from there too? If this creature did, it would be extremely bad. Knowing his luck, which, to be completely honest, was nearly as bad as Tsunade Heims, this dragon would end up being the reincarnated spirit of the Kyuubi or something. A chuckle. No, I'm not from wherever you or Vritra's host came from. The dragon snorted as it shifted its head slightly so that it could stare directly into Issei's eyes. As for who I am the Welsh dragon, Diedrich. I am also the one who resides in your left arm. Issei's eyes momentarily turned to look down at his left arm, his mind remembering the red gauntlet that had appeared around it and given him the edge during his fight with Tsukumo. The dragon, Diedrich, nodded when Issei looked back up at him. Yes, Hyodo Issei. I am your sacred gear, your sacred gift from the biblical god. I am the reason that the so-called Yumaheim took any interest in you, the reason that Rias Gremory reincarnated you into a devil, and the reason that you remember anything about being Jiraiya of the Sanin. Diedrich stood on its legs so that he was now towering over Issei's relatively small frame. And I am sealed within the boosted gear, and by extension I am sealed within you. I guess that would make you similar to that blonde kid you used to teach, a Jinchuriki, was it? If he's sealed inside me, then he must have had access to all my experiences. Issei looked up at Diedrich, his eyes serious. You say that like I will find it insulting. Two of the best people I know were Jinchuriki. Diedrich grinned, his red teeth like protrusions glinting sinisterly. You certainly are an interesting one, aren't you, Issei? I had expected a more negative reaction. Issei snorted at the dragon's words as he sat on the ground, leaning back on his arms. As much as the parallels are there, you are no Biju nor do I have any substantive reason to be afraid of you, Diedrich. From what Naruto and Kushina have said, the Kyuubi, even on their initial meeting, gave off a sinister and bloodthirsty aura. You, on the other hand, have given off something of a prideful one that is in no way malicious. Furthermore, you allowed me to access the power of this gauntlet in my fight with Saji without any sort of repercussion. An act that a Biju would never do, an act which gives you more than just the benefit of the doubt. Issei paused slightly before he crossed his arms. And I'll have you know the ladies, even the winged, murderous ones, flock to me because I'm the best-looking male specimen around. The red dragon threw its giant head back, roaring in laughter. You don't disappoint. I have had many hosts since the Great War, but I know that you, Hyodo Issei, will certainly prove to be the finest and most interesting of the lot. I can instantly tell that you are the most powerful person I've ever been sealed in. One that will spread my name far and wide. That will certainly show that white guy, you are correct. I am nothing like your so-called Biju and I am certainly no Kyuubi. Issei grinned, his eyes trained on his left arm. So, are you going to explain to me how this boosted gear works, or do I have to keep waiting around? The Welsh dragon lowered his head so that it was level with Issei, a grin which proved it could make Issei a chopstick for itself dancing across its muzzle. The boosted gear, one of the 13 Longinus which have enough power to kill even God. The one who wields this sacred gear simultaneously has to cooperate with me. And my basic ability is to double the user's your power every 10 seconds. However, the more your desire for something grows, the more intense your feelings become, the more the sacred gear will evolve and the more diversified its power becomes. The brown-haired boy stared at his left arm in something like wonder. To double my power every 10 seconds, that's quite a frightening ability. And the price for access to these tier powers? Issei asked and corrected himself, his years of experience, as both a shinobi and as a disgruntled consumer, telling him that despite how Diedrich had presented himself, nothing as powerful as this would come free of charge. Diedrich smiled, nodding his head, satisfied that while his host acted like an idiot most the time, in truth he was anything but. You possess a large amount of combat experience, a great power in all that chakra you possess. However, even you know that your body, whilst sturdy compared to the average human, will still be unable to withstand the mass concentration of power that will inevitably result from constantly boosting your power using the boosted gear. The Welsh dragon shifted slightly so that he was now standing on just his hind legs rather than on all fours. Thus, when a time comes that you need power which exceeds what you can handle with that human body of yours, I will need a sacrifice of something great in order to allow you to access power even greater than what you could imagine. Moving his arm, Diedrich seemed to hold out a fist to Issei. Until that time, however, I will give you power, allow access to the benefits of the boosted gear anytime you want, partner. Issei smiled, sensing the genuine nature of the dragon's offer, the distinct lack of deceit when the Welsh dragon spoke throughout the whole conversation, confirming it was far from anything resembling a Biju. I accept your condition. However, if you ever betray me, Diedrich, being sealed inside a gauntlet and forgotten about will be the least of your worries. The red dragon emperor snorted, his fist still outstretched as he muttered under his breath. Ungrateful brat. The Welsh dragon's response brought a grin onto Issei's face. I don't need to explain why I won't betray you, time and my actions will do that for me. The brown-haired boy finally brought his arm up so that his fist was outstretched in a similar manner to Diedrich's. I was right, you are nothing like the Biju. Let this be the start of the legend that is the great Hyodo Issei-sama and his partner, Diedrich the Welsh dragon. Their hands connected into a fist bump which marked the establishment of the dynamic duo who would forever change the supernatural world for better or worse. Hyodo Issei, now a wielder of boosted gear Longinus class sacred gear, and boy was that a mouthful, woke with a jolt, his eyes widening immediately as he stared at the ceiling of his room. Sighing, he moved his right arm so that it was resting across his forehead as he processed everything that had happened yesterday. He was apparently Jiraiya of the Sannin. He had been turned into a devil, a servant of Rias Gramarye. He had a dragon sealed inside him, and his old friend Hitaki Sakumo had apparently joined him in this life as Genshiro Saji. Truthfully, Issei was surprised he hadn't gone crazy or anything yet. Sighing again for who knew which time, he tried to move his left arm. However, once his brain turned on fully, he found that it was currently wrapped in what he assumed was a big, soft, warm, fleshy pillow. Wait. Rewind that. Fleshy? Since when were pillows fleshy? Issei suddenly jolted awake, his eyes wide open as he looked at what, or rather who, his arm was intertwined with. Because his arm was currently resting in between the huge mountains Rias Gremorio so casually called her breasts. Moving his eyes up slightly so that he was staring at Ria's face rather than her breasts, Issei found her red hair fanning out across the bed, the sunlight streaming in through the window giving her a divine aura. It made the crimson-haired girl appear even more beautiful than usual. And Issei was sure that the girl before him could put even the hottest supermodels to shame on one of her off days. Issei smiled softly at the girl. Despite everything that had happened between them, he was being truthful when he had said she had qualities that he admired greatly. Suddenly Issei's mind froze as he realized something wrong amidst the otherwise perfect morning. I couldn't tell straight away that I was sleeping next to such a beautiful, naked woman. Have my super pervert senses left me? When Rias woke up an hour later she found Issei sitting in the corner of the room, his knees tucked under his chin and a depression cloud over his head as he rocked back and forth methodically. Rias could only sweat drop at the scene. Issei-kun, what are you doing? Issei turned around slowly, his face looking more like that of a dying man's than a self-proclaimed greatest hentai. I couldn't tell I was this close to naked Oppai with my eyes closed, and my reputation as a super pervert is tarnished. Tears suddenly sprouted from his eyes as he started banging the ground with his hand. Rias giggled slightly. This continued for a few moments before her giggles turned into a heartfelt laugh. Despite everything that happened she found that Issei's antics would make her day. As her laughter finally died down, she sighed in content before giving Issei the most beautiful smile the pervert had ever seen. Good morning, Issei-kun. Issei sighed, already used to the world not understanding the struggles of a super pervert. Standing up, he replied, Good morning, Riasheim. Didn't think you would come after what happened yesterday. Rias shrugged, hair gliding down her shoulders, her face taking on a more serious expression for a moment. It is precisely because of that I came. I want to show you that I am worthy, and I want to get to know you beyond the perverted idiot you project yourself to be. Issei grinned slightly. He was pleased that she was proving to be very persistent and determined to both try and convince him that she was someone worth following and to get to know him better. To an extent it reminded him of Naruto and the blonde shinobi's own stubbornness. As Rias continued to stare at him seriously, as if she were trying to will her determination into him, Issei's mind briefly drifted back to Saji's words from their talk yesterday. I know you said you'd give her a chance, but I don't mean just sit and wait for her to do things herself unilaterally. Give her a real chance. Get to know her peerage, know her goals. Create bonds with them. Be friends with them. He hid the small, genuine smile appearing on his face. You are right, Sakumo. I will get to know you and your peerage, however whether I support you and your goals with all my power is up to you, Rias Gremory. And why exactly are you naked? Not that I am complaining of course. Issei asked and added, his eyebrows wiggling. The crimson-haired beauty sighed before resting her forehead on Issei's shoulder. I can't sleep with clothes on. Her breath tickled Issei's body. A good habit. Maybe I should stop sleeping in my clothes, Issei said as his eyebrows continued to wiggle. Rias playfully slapped his shoulder in response. So, you do this with the others? Neither Kiba or Koneko really enjoy this sort of thing. Rias shook her head. But I occasionally do this with Akeno. We're best friends after all. Issei got a bit of a nosebleed as his mind conjured a mental image of Rias and Akeno sleeping together naked. You must invite me next time you do sleep with Akeno. Rias puffed her cheeks in annoyance. Oh, am I not good enough by myself? Issei's visage suddenly took on a heroic tone, a fire seemingly blazing behind him to show the passion he was currently feeling. You are Riasheim. But the needs of the Icha fanbase must come first. And their need is for the great Issei-sama to describe to them the scene of two busty babes sleeping together naked. I hope you understand, Riasheim. Rias' response was to simply pull on Issei's cheek with an annoyed look in her eyes. Figures, she totally ignored me in favor of my mother's cooking. That was the bland-colored thought going through Issei's mind as he sat in front of the newly dubbed, perverted council, which now consisted of Matsuda, Motohama, Kiba and Saji. Though when later interrogated by the general student population the latter two would claim that they were forced, blackmailed and manhandled into attendance. Throughout the morning the brown-haired boy had sulked slightly, not believing that his manly charm had failed to an array of homemade bacon, eggs and sausages which were all cooked to perfection. Grudgingly Issei had to admit his mother made a damn fine breakfast. Currently, though, there were slightly more important issues which unfolding around him. The group of 5 were currently discussing, well, more like 3 of them were discussing, their plan of attack for the next prime research location, the public baths near the outskirts of the city. We must all do our due diligence. The location of the peepholes. Escape routes. Possible security the place has. We must know all these before we even think about going to paradise. Motohama and Matsuda nodded seriously as they scribbled down notes into their respective notebooks. Saji and Kiba, on the other hand, gave each other a look. To fully understand the power of Icha, the way of the super pervert, we must unite, my perverted brethren. Motohama and Matsuda proceeded to bow to their god and savior. Saji and Kiba simply exchanged another look. You, the 2 closet perverts making googly eyes at each other. Promptly the blonde duo spluttered denials in response, which Issei ignored. You can just stand there and absorb the blows that your much braver, manlier comrades will inevitably receive for their commitment to the way of the super pervert. Suddenly the door to their sacred pervert ground, otherwise known as the gym storage room, opened, startling the group of males. Upon seeing a distinctly feminine figure, Motohama, Matsuda and Issei immediately activated their super pervert defense protocols. That is, to us mere mortals, to immediately scream like pre-adolescent girls and hide behind the closest thing, Saji and Kiba. Era, what is happening here I wonder? The sweet voice of the one and only Himejima Akeno drifted into the room. Issei, upon hearing that it was his favorite black-haired girl at Kuo Academy, by virtue of her having the largest rack by a fair margin, suddenly disappeared from his spot behind Saji and reappeared next to Akeno, an arm wrapped around her delicate shoulders. Oh, Akeno-hime, it's you. We perverts have decided to do some sacred research for the next Icha. Would you care to join us? Issei smiled as his free hand patted her pocket, which was shaped in a manner that was quite similar to a book. A very distinct orange book, because when it came to recognizing his holy work, Issei could even feel colors, unless you'd like to model for me right now? The black-haired girl hid the lower half of her face with her right hand as she giggled whilst her left hand stroked Issei's cheek in a somewhat intimate gesture. Motohama and Matsuda instantly got their How to Pick Up Women book out, which was distinctly different from their research, and Issei-sama's instruction notebooks, and instantly started to scribble down the techniques being shown firsthand in front of them. Era, I would like that, Akeno purred seductively, her right hand moving so that it was now located around Issei's neck. To watch the masterful author of the Icha series perform his research would be an honor. Akeno licked her lips as she leaned closer, trying to goad a reaction out of Issei. The brown-haired pervert only smiled a perverse, goofy smile, moving his hands lower so that they were nearing her perfect ass, his head also leaning closer. It was obvious to the duo that they were teasing each other, however to the other occupants in the room, except Saji, it seemed like they were really going to go to first base, right there. Kiba, whose face was red with embarrassment and whose hands were partially covering his virgin eyes, seeing the intimate display, coughed loudly into his hand, catching the attention of everyone in the room. Motohama, Matsuda and even Saji, who had also gotten out a notebook, all gave him a death glare whilst Issei and Akeno merely gave him an amusing smile whilst detaching from each other. Era, Kiba-kun is so shy. A sadistic smile suddenly appeared on Akeno's lips as Kiba suddenly felt a sinking feeling in his stomach. I wonder if he needs some resistance training, Issei-kun? Issei, who had also gained an identical sadistic smile, suddenly appeared next to Kiba, a rope in hand. I agree, Akeno-hime. And I know where the best resistance training. Being tied up and dumped into the public women's bath, it seemed like the whole conversation had gone full circle. With speed that far surpassed even Minato, Issei tied Kiba up and threw the blonde knight over his shoulder like he was a sack of potatoes. Come on my fellow brothers, and lady, to the women's public bath. With a cheer Motohama and Matsuda enthusiastically bounded off. Issei and Akeno also followed behind, Kiba struggling fruitlessly against his hemp confines. Chatting amicably. The two were obviously bordering between flirting and conversing, as they talked about the various topics that only a super pervert and a sadistic priestess would talk about together. Seeing that the others were leaving without him, Saji sighed and followed. It wasn't like he would escape. Saji was sure that he would suffer a fate worse than even Kiba if he was to disappear now, and to be perfectly honest, he would really like to see how Issei survived those beatings he got daily by the hand of vengeful, and towel-clad, women everywhere. However, as the group of 6, 5 and 1 wriggling pile of Bishonen male, neared the public baths, their formation not changing from the start, several dashing black flashes appearing in his peripheral vision caught Saji's attention. Turning his head, he saw that those black flashes seemed to be heading off towards the looming, abandoned church of Kuo. Saji turned his head back to the other Kuo Academy students and was somewhat unsurprised that Issei, who appeared to be having a debate with Akano over whether his books accurately described foreplay, didn't seem to notice the anomaly in the area. For as much as Issei used his perverted antics to cover his more thoughtful and dangerous skills, at the heart of it, the brown-haired boy was still very much a pervert. Sighing and hoping, in retrospect it was more like wishful thinking, that he wouldn't receive a punishment similar to Kiba. Saji pushed chakra into his legs as he pushed off the ground towards the direction of the Kuo church. The end. Thanks for watching. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.